Good evening. I'm Savannah Sellers coming to you from NBC News World Headquarters in New York. Here are some of the stories we're following now tonight. One more time, California braces for one more round of storms, but doesn't have the resources it needs for this last storm system, especially with the floods and mudslides the state is already dealing with. Frustration grows. The White House says there are no visitation logs for Biden's Delaware residents after a top Republican calls for their release. This follows the discovery of more classified documents in Biden's home over the weekend.
You live in a glass house, do not throw stones, and I think President Biden was caught throwing stones.
The next chapter, Ukraine prepares to launch a new offensive as Russia and Belarus begin joint drills. A military expert joins us to break down the latest on the war. And honoring his dream, celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his own words.
I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality.
Hey there, so happy to have you joining us tonight. And we begin this evening with the winter storm Catastrophe in California. The ninth atmospheric river, it's called, in less than 3 weeks is slamming the state. At least 22 people have died so far, many in cars swept away by floodwaters or killed by falling trees. And it isn't just rain. Parts of the Sierra Nevadas have been hit with more than 7 feet of snow in just the past week. Now, this could help feed the state's reservoirs this summer, but right now it's posing threats to people living there. This weekend, President Biden issued a major disaster declaration in California, specifically in Merced, Sacramento, and Santa Cruz. Governor Gavin Newsom also signed an executive order for communities impacted by the storm. This is all coming from a parade of atmospheric rivers and winter storms that began almost a month ago, and recovery costs are already topping $1 billion. NBC News senior national correspondent Jay Gray joins us now from on the ground there. He is in Santa Cruz, California. Jay, good to have you with us. So I know there are landslide warnings and evacuations in the Bay Area. What conditions are people dealing with today?
Yeah, and Savannah, I'm so glad you asked, because today from this morning, what we've seen here, intense rain. We've had blue skies and sunshine, a bit of a spitting rain right now with just a patch of sun breaking through the clouds, as you can see here. 30 minutes ago, we had hail at one point. So you can see the different conditions so many are dealing with. And you talked about that stream of storms. So it's been rain, then a couple of days off, then rain again. Felton Grove, which is about 15, 20 miles from where we are right now, has really had to deal with those changing conditions.
And Jay, President Biden, I know, signed a major disaster declaration, as I said just a minute ago, and then Governor Newsom signed an executive order. I mean, I know these storms aren't over, which makes it difficult to even get started on cleanup, or I'm sure for residents to even really start wrapping their heads around that. But what does recovery look like at this point?
Yeah, very difficult. Right now, they're still in emergency mode. I mean, you can see the roadway here with the barricades, the debris. A part of this bridge has been ripped away, the asphalt and the concrete, so it's not structurally stable right now. California's Lieutenant Governor talked about the situation and how widespread the problems are.
We're a very big state, the most populous, 40 million people, 500 miles of coastline, and we have seen damage from down in Santa Barbara and Montecito all the way up north on the coast, in the valley, in the mountains. It has really hit us hard from one part of the state to the next.
Yeah, they really need that federal help to really come together with the state here and try and build things like this bridge back. Money may be there. It's still going to take a long time. They need some good weather to get things started.
It absolutely is. All right, Jay, stay safe. Thank you so much for your reporting.
The cleanup was awful, but
NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns is with us now with the forecast. Bill, good evening. Always great to have you with us. So what should the people of California prepare for tonight and tomorrow?
They want to prepare for like sunshine and like nice weather. It's been ridiculous. I mean, they have to be sick of looking at the forecast and seeing rain. And we're almost there. We're going to get past this next storm, and then we're going to head into next weekend and beyond, and it looks much drier. Today, we had a slug of rain go through. It wasn't even a big storm, but because things are just so soaked, the hillsides gave way in certain areas, trees were falling down, and we had more damage from a minor storm. And that's going to happen again with the next one. So we still have a couple people that are under flood watches, not many. We still have a little bit of wet weather rotating through, especially the Bay Area. It's not a lot, but again, it only takes a little bit to have some issues. We're fine, L.A., San Diego, you're fine too. And you got poured on in San Diego today, some of the heaviest rain that you've seen in the last 2 weeks. So here's the next storm. This is the timing of this. This is 8 p.m. Wednesday. Cold front coming down. The storm itself is way up there near Seattle. It's just going to be a narrow band of heavy rain. It's going to go through quickly. Going to drop maybe a quarter to a half an inch of rain, and then that'll be it. So compared to the other storms, this is nothing. But as I said, it doesn't take a lot. So San Francisco and the Bay Area, right around 10 p.m. as we go through Wednesday. Notice, though, it dries up. It never makes it to Southern California. So this is not an issue for Santa Barbara, to Los Angeles, or San Diego whatsoever. So that's good news on that part.
So is there any end in sight, Bill?
After this storm, we do get a break. And then, of course, all these storms that come in the West Coast, we then have to deal with them in the middle of the country. So the storm that's hitting today is going to, by Wednesday, go into the middle of the nation. And we don't like to see this. This is a weather map that shows you the colors. The blue and the white shows you the snow. The green and the yellows and the red shows you the rain and thunderstorms. And we have a chance of more severe weather in the south. Now, this should not be like last Thursday when we lost so many lives in those horrendous Alabama tornadoes. This will be severe weather, isolated tornadoes, hopefully only a couple. And this will be areas forming in East Texas, heading through Arkansas, also Louisiana into Mississippi eventually. And then the cold side of this storm, yes, remember, it is the middle of winter. I haven't done many snow forecasts, but this will be one of them. We have 11 million people. We start tomorrow with snow, mostly in the Four Corner region in the Rockies, where it should be. But then tomorrow night, it heads out into areas like Denver, and then eventually into the plains on Wednesday. This will be a decent snowstorm. Denver's looking at around 4 to 8 inches of snow. You're under winter storm warnings. A lot of kids are probably smiling, probably thinking snow day come Wednesday. It's a good possibility. And then this kicks across the plains, Nebraska, Omaha, all the way to the north. So as we go through the week ahead, by the time we get to Wednesday, that's where the snow's in the middle of the nation. There comes our storm Wednesday night. Thursday, we kick that out. We dry it out for Friday, and then it begins our recovery. And then we can try to, see how much damage was done. But also, we had some good out of this. Some reservoirs are almost full now compared to, they were half full before this began 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely right. Certainly helpful for the drought, though scary while it's happening. Bill Cairns, thank you so much. Now, let's switch gears here. And Republicans are asking more and more questions about President Biden's handling of classified documents, particularly after the White House acknowledged that even more classified material was found at his Delaware home than previously known. Biden lawyers found one document with a classified marking on Wednesday, and then a White House lawyer with a security clearance arrived and found 5 more documents, which yesterday prompted House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky, to send a letter asking the White House for the visitor logs to Biden's home.
We want to know the visitor logs to the residents. We want to know who had access to the Biden Center for Diplomacy, because this is the same type of investigation that the Democrats were so outraged and launched and demanded happen to President Trump.
Now, the White House and the Secret Service say they don't keep those visitor logs for Biden's home. This is the latest in a string of revelations about classified material found in Biden's possession. Joining us now on all this is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Hey, Monica, thanks for being with us tonight. So this interest from House Republicans in an investigation is, of course, happening against the backdrop of a Justice Department investigation. We know this week Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed a special counsel, and all of that came after a lot of questions about the timeline here, when documents were found and then when the public was made aware. So first, just get us up to speed on what happened this weekend with those new documents and with that request for visitor logs.
Yeah, there have been so many questions throughout this entire now investigation, Savannah, and that's because the White House says they couldn't always be forthcoming with what actually did transpire. But there are a total of 3 batches of classified documents and material that we are referencing here. The first was discovered at the Penn Biden Center here in Washington, D.C. back in November, though, of course, the White House didn't disclose that until after media reports in the last week or so. The second and third batches both were located in the president's Wilmington, Delaware home, one in the locked garage and the other in an adjacent room. And what was notable is about that is that there was initially just one page that was identified by White House lawyers, but they didn't have the proper security clearance, so they had to get somebody who did to go review it. And then when they did that at the end of last week, they found 5 additional classified pages. So the White House over the weekend wanted to reveal this new information, but really it comes as President Biden hasn't answered reporters' questions on the matter in 4 straight days. And when it comes to those House Republicans and those congressional investigations, Savannah, we know they've asked for visitor logs from the Delaware home, but the White House says tonight, along with the Secret Service, those simply do not exist. It's not something that is kept because it's a private residence. Now, Secret Service does do some background checks. They just don't hold on to that information long term, and that is a standard practice, we understand, dating back decades with presidents when it comes to their personal homes. Savannah.
So, Monica, you mentioned that the president hasn't answered a lot of reporters' questions on this, but at this point, what is the White House's response to criticism, especially as it grows to even criticism from within his own party about the transparency here? And also, do we know how the president himself is feeling about all this, both the documents being found and how it's being handled?
Yeah, there has been mounting pressure here, no doubt. And the White House attorneys have said, look, we are cooperating fully with the Department of Justice review. And because of that, they say they can't reveal certain details that are pertinent to the ongoing investigation. So they say they just simply can't tell us everything they would like to. And that's the case for the president as well. That's why publicly he's not speaking out. But behind the scenes, I understand from a couple of sources who were briefed on really the president and his mindset in the days after this. And we understand he was very frustrated with the whole backlash and the entire situation. And again, it's something he would probably like to speak out about, but his lawyers have advised him not to do so in any thorough way at this time. Savannah.
All right. NBC's Monica Alba for us tonight. Thank you so much. And now let's stay on this with NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos, who's joining us. Danny, always great to have you with us to help analyze. So at this point, with all the Biden documents found, talk to us about what matters legally here. Things like intent or cooperation. What comes in when you're reading these things? What do you think?
Well, of course, we're comparing it on some level to the Trump Mar-a-Lago fiasco. And for that reason, you can break the controversy into really 2 components. Part 1 is, how did the documents get down there? What are the documents? Who brought them down there? And what was their state of mind when they brought those documents down there? And then part 2 is, what did they do when they found out? In the Biden case, it seems like they were more forthcoming than the Trump team, which fought them tooth and nail. And we've all been over this before. But as it relates to Biden, I think one of the most important cases to look at may not be Trump, but maybe past similar cases. And I'm thinking about cases like Hillary Clinton, the Clinton email fiasco, in which James Comey gave an analysis, which, by the way, was very unconventional. But he concluded that applying the criminal standard of criminal negligence, a very high degree of negligence, that no crimes were committed. And I think the DOJ, because this has happened very rarely, these kinds of controversies, they will look at similar cases and say, well, if this is inadvertent, then looking at other past cases like the Hillary Clinton emails, then this too does not rise to the level of criminal negligence. And there's very little liability for the Biden team on the second half of the equation, because as we all know, they've been very forthcoming. Now, there are some arguments to be made that they could have been more forthcoming earlier in the process, but that doesn't really go to the intent or the knowledge when the documents were brought down to the house or the garage or by the Corvette or wherever.
So, Danny, I mentioned a moment ago that Republicans are interested in this investigation in the House. I first want to play some sound here on some of that. This is from House Oversight Chair James Comer. Take a listen.
Well, my concern is that the special counsel was called for But yet hours after that, we still had the president's personal attorneys who have no security clearance still rummaging around the president's residence looking for things. I mean, that would essentially be a crime scene, so to speak, after the appointment of a special counsel.
Danny, is that a valid argument legally?
Let's start with politically. It's a dangerous argument because if you're saying that Biden's attorneys may have been irresponsible with the documents after they were reported, then we get into the whataboutism supernova, because you can point to the Trump team and they're fighting and arguably even submitting falsified documents or affirmations about the documents themselves. So that is very, very problematic. Of course, if it is the case that Biden lawyers were just, as we just heard, rummaging around in the documents, that could pose a problem. But realistically, it doesn't seem consistent with what has been reported about what the attorneys did do. If you want to call it a crime scene, well, the best analogy would be these lawyers backed out as if they'd found, contraband or a dead body, and basically did everything but do chalk outlines on the floor where the documents were. They don't appear to have done anything funny with the documents, even though you may see, one person on the Republican side saying that they did. It's not consistent with the reporting. So the key here is, what do they do after? Are they forthcoming? Prosecutors, the Justice Department, they like people that accept responsibility for their conduct. They like people that cooperate with them. And that goes a long way for both criminals and people who would avoid being charged.
Danny, I want to play a little bit of sound from Congressman Matt Cartwright. He was on Fox this weekend, because I think this might be something that a lot of people at home are kind of thinking about and wondering. Let's take a listen and we'll talk.
We've got to review how departing presidents and vice presidents are going about organizing the archiving of their documents, both classified and unclassified, because this can't go on.
So, Danny, I think, look, these are presidents. They're not your average person who's headed out of a job after 4 or 8 years with boxes of things that they're going to lock up in a closet or a garage. It should be harder, right, for presidents to take off with these documents that potentially have these security clearances. What is the process in place?
Yeah, and in fairness, I said this about Trump, and I'll say it about Biden. Does anyone really think either Trump or Biden are carrying accordion folders out of the White House or bankers' boxes? They've got people. People are doing that for them. There's a pretty good argument, whether it's Trump or Biden, that the way the documents arrived in their home or at Mar-a-Lago was not them personally. It may have been at their direction. So there's that challenge. But also, look, it seems like this has been going on for a while, and that may be the real message here, is we do need to come up with a system, because this is inevitably something that's going to happen, whether the president, him or herself, or his people take documents out of the White House. You're absolutely right. If I leave my law firm and I go out with a couple memos, no big deal. Maybe there's some privileged documents, but they're not classified. And that's the risk that happens with a president leaving his or her job after either 4 or 8 years. And there needs to be a better system in place so that we don't run into this problem again.
And then we have these ongoing investigations, both congressional with the Justice Department, because of all this confusion. NBC's Danny Ceballos, as always, thank you very much. Good to see you. Now, searching for survivors. Ukraine is digging through the rubble after a deadly attack on an apartment block. We have a report from Kyiv. But first, we'll leave you with this moment from Martin Luther King Jr. on this MLK Day.
And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps. But it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
Welcome back. The Ukrainian city of Dnipro is mourning tonight after a missile attack killed at least 40 people on Saturday, including 3 children. The Ukrainian government says Russian rockets targeted a high-rise residential building, completely destroying 72 apartments and damaging over 200 more. Rescue operations continue to sift through the rubble as authorities try to help roughly 400 people find new homes. Following the attack, President Volodymyr Zelensky gave a strong warning to Russia.
Це терор буде для всіх, і для тих, хто вбиває, і для тих, хто допомагає вбивати.
Now, the Kremlin denies Russia was behind this strike. NBC's Matt Bradley has more.
Well, it's our understanding that no living people, have been removed from this wreckage by rescue workers for much of the past day. The last time we heard about that was yesterday on Sunday. But it sounds as though, from what we're hearing from rescue workers, that they are really giving up hope of finding anyone alive in that horrific wreckage that I think you're seeing on your screen right now. You know, the fact is there was a real scramble, and it was amazing that they were able to pull some people out alive when you look at what happened there. Now, this is apparently one of the deadliest strikes on civilians ever since this war began nearly 11 months ago. And it really just goes to show that, you know, Russia has not ceased in targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, particularly electricity systems. And that's why we've seen rolling blackouts, particularly here in Kyiv, which has really taken the brunt of a lot of these attacks. Now, you know, the Russians, we heard from the Kremlin, they said that they didn't launch this strike. They never strike civilian residential buildings and things like that. They implied that this might have actually been the debris falling from a missile that was intercepted by Ukrainian anti-missile systems, most of which are provided by the West. Now, that's possible, but I've been around in Kyiv and seen a lot of these debris that have fallen when missiles are intercepted, and they're really quite small. They don't do the kind of damage that we saw in that apartment building in Dnipro. That just doesn't seem likely. Now, the Ukrainians have shot back and said that this is a war crime, and they know the perpetrators who did this. Back to you.
Matt Bradley, thank you very much. Stay safe. Meanwhile, Ukraine is preparing for battle on a new front. Its border with Belarus. Earlier today, the neighboring country began joint Air Force drills with Russia, stoking fears that Belarus could become Russia's battlefield ally in its invasion of Ukraine. Joining us now on this is NBC News military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Steph Twitty. He's the former deputy commander of United States European Command. Lieutenant General, always great to have you on to help us understand all this. Give us your big picture perspective here. What does it mean if Belarus becomes this active battlefield ally for Russia in this war, meaning they are able to use that to enter into Ukraine? What does it mean in terms of military strategy and power?
So what it would mean is Ukraine would be fighting on three fronts. You already know that they're fighting in the south vicinity of Kherson. They're fighting down in the east, southeast in vicinity of the Donbass. And if a new front opens up north of them, coming out of Belarus, there's about 140 miles from the Belarus border, Kyiv border, to Ukraine border to Kyiv, about 140 miles. So that would be a third front. And so that would mean that the Ukrainians would have to fight on three fronts. And as you know, they have a military of about 200 to 250,000. They are suffering losses every day. So it would be hard for them to keep up with a three-front war and be successful.
And all that said, it sounds like, do you think this could tip the balance of war in Russia's favor? We know that Russia had anticipated to do better at the start of this war, nearly a year ago at this point. But now, with Ukraine being able to put up the defensive that they have, what do you think this particular front along the Belarus border would mean? Would it help Russia significantly?
So Russia, doing the joint drills, they have about 9,000 soldiers in Belarus going through training right now. Belarus has an Army and Air Force combined of about 45,000 troops. These troops are mostly Russian trained, and so you can anticipate these troops are ill-trained, very similar to what we saw the Russians. Poorly led, ill-trained, don't have the right equipment and so forth. So I don't think if a third front opened up and you saw Belarus introduce themselves in the conflict, that you would see a huge impact simply because of the not well-trained troops that they would bring along.
Viewers at home, on your screen there, you were seeing the Ukrainian city of Soledar, which is also of note at this point, given that Russia says they have actually captured that city. Ukraine is denying it, but obviously, to your point, this sort of multiple different areas right now of high stress for the Ukrainian defensive. Also, I'm wondering, Belarus is not a member of NATO or the EU, but it is a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. What does becoming an active player in this war mean for Belarus? Are there consequences in terms of international cooperation?
Absolutely. So the sanctions that you see that we placed on Russia, you can expect for those same sanctions to apply to Belarus if they introduce themselves into this war. And Belarus is a welfare state. It has about a $68 billion GDP. And if they introduce themselves into this war, the people of Belarus would suffer more so than, Russia has the state that suffers more. The people would suffer more in terms of sanctions being applied to Belarus.
Lieutenant General Twitty, as always, we so appreciate your analysis and time. Thanks for joining us tonight. Now, after the break, more of the top stories we're following this hour, including a plane crash in Nepal that killed dozens of people. What authorities are now saying. Plus, an Italian mob boss who's been in hiding for decades is now in custody. We'll tell you about the tip that led to his arrest. And people with diabetes are struggling to get their hands on medication because some are using the drug for something entirely different. That's all just ahead. Stay with us. It's time now for some of the big headlines we're watching tonight. An Indiana dad has been arrested after his toddler was seen with a loaded gun. Get this, on live TV. Police in Beech Grove, Indiana are featured on a TV show called On Patrol Live. And police say the son was holding the pistol in his apartment's hallway and even pulled the trigger. Officers recovered the weapon and the dad is due in court tomorrow. A basketball player at the University of Alabama has been charged with capital murder. Police say the charges against the athlete and another man came after a nearby campus death where shots were fired into a vehicle. The university says the junior player has been removed from campus and is no longer on the team. In Nepal, a passenger plane crashed minutes before landing. At least 69 people were killed. Authorities say they have retrieved the cockpit voice and flight data recorder and hope it will offer insight into what caused the crash. This marks Nepal's deadliest aviation accident in 30 years. In New York, the FAA is investigating a near-plane collision on JFK's runway. A Delta Airlines plane was preparing for takeoff on Friday when air controllers noticed an American Airlines plane crossing in front of its path.
Delta 1943, cancel takeoff clearance.
This animation you're seeing right here, it shows the moments before the possible collision. The Delta pilot was able to brake 1,000 feet away and no one was hurt. And an American imprisoned in Iran for 7 years is launching a hunger strike. Siamak Namazi is pushing for President Biden to get him and other Americans held in Iran back home. The week-long hunger strike comes on the anniversary of when he was left out of a 2016 prisoner swap. Now, after 30 years on the run, Italy's #1 criminal, Matteo Messina Denaro, is finally behind bars. He's a convicted killer and thought to be the leader of the notorious Cosa Nostra organized crime group. Police apprehended the Mafia boss at a medical clinic in the Sicilian capital, Palermo. Italy's prime minister called the arrest, quote, a great victory. Sky News correspondent Adam Parsons has more.
Italy had waited decades for this seminal moment. The arrest of Matteo Messina Denaro, the mafia boss who had been on the run for 30 years. Messina Denaro came for medical attention to this clinic in the Sicilian city of Palermo. He came with a false name, but there were 100 officers waiting for him. His arrest confirmed by the police, words many thought they would never hear.
Oggi, 16 gennaio 2023,
On the 16th of January, Italian police, in the investigation coordinated by Palermo's attorney, arrested the fugitive Matteo Messina Denaro at a health clinic where he was undergoing some medical treatment.
Bravissimi, bravi, bravi. On the streets, a joyful reaction and thanks for the police. Messina Denaro is a feared name with a dreadful reputation. He's been linked to scores of murders, including bombings in Italy and the killing of 2 people who were supposed to be investigating him. He's already been sentenced in absence to life in prison. He inspires fear. The Italian Prime Minister came to Sicily, acclaiming the arrest as a beautiful day for Italy.
It's a day of celebration for us. We can tell our children that the Mafia can be defeated. We haven't won the war, we have not defeated the Mafia yet, but this was a fundamental battle to win, and it's a hard blow for organised crime.
But how was he caught? Many are praising relentless police work. Others suspect a more cynical reason.
What we can see historically is that when people are kind of found, it's because there are different balances that have taken place whereby perhaps they no longer have political protection, perhaps the level of silence and associates around them kind of is no longer there. So I'm rather cynical as to why this happens now.
Messina Denaro was swept away in a police convoy and taken to a secret location. Italy's most feared criminal may never be free again. Adam Parsons, Sky News.
Right, our thanks to that report for Adam. There's been a lot of buzz around the drug Ozempic lately, so much so the public's increasing demand for it has caused a shortage. So what does this so-called miracle drug do, and why are people clamoring for it? It's traditionally been used to treat diabetes, but it's gained popularity for another reason: weight loss. NBC's Ann Thompson has more.
Ellie Diaz thought she found the answer to her lifelong struggle with weight in the drugs Ozempic and Wegovy.
My cravings were completely gone. I started losing weight rapidly.
Her doctor prescribed the diabetes drug Ozempic, which is not approved by the FDA for weight loss, and then Wegovy, which is. But when unrelated health problems forced her to stop using the injectable drugs,
I regained all my weight in around 6 months.
Nicknamed Skinny Pens on social media, skyrocketing popularity led to shortages of Ozempic and Wegovy. Both drugs contain semaglutide, which mimics a hormone that makes you feel full, leading to weight loss, as long as you're on it.
This is not a quick fix. It is not a quick fix. This is long-term management for people whose excess weight or obesity has impacted the quality of their life.
Dr. Domenica Rubino worked on one of 2 studies that showed when people stopped taking semaglutide, they regained weight.
Are these drugs designed to help someone drop 2 dress sizes? No, these are serious medicines that should be used to treat serious disease.
The maker of both Ozempic and Wegovy, Novo Nordisk, says its research supports the belief that obesity is a chronic disease that requires long-term management, and that in the case of Ozempic, does not encourage off-label use. Ellie Diaz wants to use Wegovy again.
In my case, I believe a combination of medication and diet and life change will make the complete change.
To keep this mom of 3 healthy for years to come.
All right, our thanks to NBC's Ann Thompson. Now, reconnecting Treme, one of the nation's oldest black neighborhoods. When we come back, we'll introduce you to the New Orleans area that's rebuilding its community.
America has broad racist elements still alive. Racism is still existing in American society in many areas of the society, North and South.
From the archives tonight, that was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaking in 1967 with NBC News at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. On this MLK Day, we are taking a look at efforts to revitalize and repair damage done to historically black communities. New Orleans' Treme neighborhood is one of America's oldest black neighborhoods. In the late 60s, it became one of a number of black and brown communities all over the country that were intentionally targeted for destruction by a highway project, the Claiborne Avenue Expressway. Now, some neighborhoods like Treme that were affected by policies of the past are getting federal funding to build back their communities. MSNBC correspondent Tremaine Lee is in New Orleans tonight, and he has more on this for us. Hi, Tremaine. It's always great to see you. So first, just tell us about this particular neighborhood. What makes Treme unique?
Hey, Savannah, Treme is a very special place, not just in New Orleans, but America, just north of the French Quarter. It has always been the heart of the black community here in New Orleans. Going back to the early 1800s, this community was filled with free black people, free people of color, as well as the enslaved. And these were artisans, musicians. Everything you love about New Orleans came from Treme. America's only true original art form, jazz, emerged from Treme. The food, the Creole cooking, all from Treme. And so this place has not only been, again, the heartbeat of a blackness centered in New Orleans, but in America for a very long time.
Oh, absolutely. And how exactly did the Claiborne Expressway change the community? Talk about its impact.
You know, this highway really split and divided and really tore apart Treme. Claiborne Avenue, which was the heart of Treme, used to be lined with big oak trees and black businesses as far as the eye could see. In that neutral ground, the median, families would have picnics. You'd have people kind of just hanging out. It was really a community center. But in the 1960s, when the interstate went up, it literally razed hundreds of homes, 400 to 500 homes, eradicated all of that beautiful, lush greenery. They tore down the oak trees and put up this kind of what folks call now the monster or a monstrosity. And so not only did it disrupt the actual geography, the layout, the lush landscape, it destroyed black homes and black businesses, forever kind of eroding the economic heartbeat of that community.
And Tremaine, the $1 trillion infrastructure law, it includes at least $1 billion that's set aside to try to fix some of this, to reconnect divided communities like this one that you're in right now. You know, it sounds like so much money. I think it's hard to get your hands around. So talk us through some of the tangible things. How will city leaders there use that money? What will it do to try to help the community?
That really is a $1 billion question that folks in this community are wrestling with. There have been different proposals from the state government proposing some plans that would tear down some of the interstates. There are community members who feel that if you tear it down, it might only lead to more gentrification. Still others want to see it beautified. You know, I've been spending time talking to folks in this community for several days about what they really want. And what they come down to is something has to change. It's been up too long. And what it represents is pretty vile stuff for this community. Let's take a listen.
It affects the psyche and the behavior of those of us that's got to engage with it day in and day out. Whether you're walking it or whether you're driving by it, it affects your psyche. You know what I mean? And for someone like me, who was born and reared in this area and saw the glaringly difference, it is painful. You know?
Well, folks agree something has to be done. The idea of tearing it down could be a very expensive proposition. Of the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, only about $1 billion of it is going towards communities like Treme to help them actually reconnect. And so you think about the cost and you think about the prospect of ushering more gentrification, there's still a lot of debate, a lot of concern among citizens about what exactly is the right answer.
Absolutely, and powerful to do that interview, Tremaine, right there under that. You can see how different that is and what it's done to a community than, like you said, oak trees and businesses lining those streets. Tremaine, thank you so much. Great reporting. We actually want to stay on this topic and head down to Florida and back in time. In the 1950s, Overtown, Miami was known as the Harlem of the South. That neighborhood was also gutted by an interstate highway. It pushed out half of the population, actually, in a decade, forcing a third of neighborhood businesses to close. Well, now a new green space could begin to heal the community. Guad Venegas has the story.
The project is being called the Underdeck. It's a giant green space, more than 30 acres that would take over the central part of Overtown, and it would help this community. It would connect it to downtown Miami. Essentially, people here could just walk down the park and arrive at the museums, the basketball arena, and the waterfront. It would revitalize a part of town that has gone through some difficult times through decades.
When Bay Hines was 6, she swung from the branches of this banyan tree. She was surrounded by the vibrant center of Overtown, Miami.
Nobody locked their doors. We slept all night with our front doors open.
Those Overtown memories the 84-year-old historian and writer grew up with are now a rarity. A predominantly black community known as the Harlem of the South that had a bustling downtown and nightlife rapidly became a ghost town, largely because of a highway project. In 1955, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act. The legislation would clear the way for the government to seize private property for public works projects.
Around about 58, when they were getting ready to do the expressway, some people already saw the handwriting on the wall and they started moving out. It was very bad. I don't know how else to tell you except that it was very bad.
During the 1960s, Overtown lost more than half its population and a third of its businesses. Overtown was sacrificed for what the government determined was necessary progress. Decades later, an expansion to the highway that still looms above the neighborhood brings new hope to this historical part of town.
So there's a lot kind of going on to explore.
Jessica Goldman-Strebnick and Trina Harris are part of the Underdeck's executive committee. This group is working to create a green space under the construction of the new I-395, a $53 million investment to build the new urban landscape.
It's going to be light, it's going to be airy, it's going to be full of landscaping and trees and green, lots of green. You're going to have bike trails, you're going to have walking trails, you're going to have art and culture.
A new use for an area overlooked for decades.
I've experienced some pain walking under the underpath when it was dark, gloomy, and walking as a child. Our committee is working extremely hard to prevent negative experiences that have happened in this community under these underpaths.
If approved, funding from the federal government could secure half the money needed. It would come from $1 billion grant allocating funds to projects that reconnect communities torn apart by past federal infrastructure across the country. Derek Fleming co-owns the Red Rooster restaurant, which has been working hard to revitalize the rich history of the 1940s and 1950s.
There was a time where people would flock here. They had to get to Overtown, particularly for a nightlife, but then we were cut off. And so this is an opportunity to reconnect, to not just allow folks to flow out, but folks to flow in a very holistic way.
A new hope and a bright future for Overtown, no longer overlooked. And the committee in charge of the project has finished a series of meetings with members of the community. They wanted insight on details to make sure that the project included what the community wanted and needed. That report has now been turned over to the city of Miami. They're going to vote on it as this moves forward. We also reached out to the Department of Transportation to ask about that grant money that they could be receiving. We were informed that they are now looking at several requests for projects like this one all across the country. One more thing, the members of the community here can turn in suggestions for a name. It is now being called the Underdeck, but the committee plans to rename it after going over the names that will be suggested by people here in Miami. Back to you.
All right, Guad Venegas, thank you very much. And turning next to the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Now Tonight continues after the break.
I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
Welcome back. Of course, today we're honoring the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we thought it would be a good idea to recognize that there's still so much to learn from his words. Dr. King spoke of the power of protest and the importance of sacrificing for those in need. But he also spoke about the need to address structural racism. Here's a look back at what made Dr. King's rhetoric so effective.
I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right temporarily defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. I believe that what self-centered men have torn down, men other-centered can build up. After all, we know in a nonviolent movement that there are these possibilities, and we go on with the faith that unmerited suffering is redemptive. But I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism.
Incredible to hear him in his own words. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. That does it for us. I'm Savannah Sellers for Now Tonight. The news continues, though, right now. Stay with us.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.